Hi, my name is Brent Hale, and I'm the founder of Maverick App, a business development prospecting platform. And the best advice I ever got was don't listen to anybody but yourself.
Ooh, don't listen to anybody but yourself. When did you get that advice? Who gave that to you?
I don't know. I think my dad gave it to me a long time ago. It doesn't necessarily mean like specifically don't listen to anybody, but at the end of the day, like listen to you and what yourself is telling you. And if you feel like that's the right decision, then do it.
Very good. So, well, let's connect that to prospecting, which is what we're going to talk about today. How
Yeah.
do you connect that to prospecting? Because I think that is good advice. And how do we connect that into the stuff that we're talking about today, my man?
Yeah, well, I think prospecting is an interesting animal in itself, but I think mainly there's a lot of advice out there about prospecting, and I think a lot of it's really good advice and a lot of it's really bad advice. But more importantly, a lot of it works for somebody, and a lot of and the same thing might not work for somebody else. So I think just as it relates to that specifically, thinking about what you do and thinking about who you are as a person, really thinking about what drives you and makes you successful in certain areas. I think it relates to that a lot. But again, there's so many different things that are out there as far as prospecting goes. At the end of the day, you kind of got to do what your core beliefs are and what you feel like is going to be the best for you.
Okay, so let's talk about that. So, what are your core beliefs about prospecting, Brent?
It's really, really hard. um, and it takes a lot of effort. And I think the big thing with prospecting that people really get wrong is that prospecting, I relate it to gold digging, right? We call gold digging prospecting, right?
Yeah.
You're prospecting in mountains to find the gold. You're not prospecting in mountains to get rich, right? I mean, the end goal is like I'm gonna get gold and I'm gonna maybe become rich. But when you prospect, you're digging constantly and you're sifting through a lot of dirt and you're sifting through a lot of sand and rock, and you're doing that over and over and over and over with the hopes to eventually find the gold. And so, my core belief in the prospecting world is that you should never be prospecting with the idea of getting a lead, like or getting a deal. You should be prospecting with the idea of getting information that's going to get you to the deal or the opportunity or the conversation, and then the lead.
Okay, so let's talk about that, right? You get the information. What sort of information should you be looking for?
Yeah, so certainly who to talk to, right? So a lot of prospecting is just identifying, am I talking to the right person? Am I reaching out to the right person? Who do I need to connect with within this organization? That's a huge component of prospecting. The other part of it is, are they actively buying now, or are they just kicking the tires? Are they interested in a conversation? Are they, so you're looking for just getting in and enjoying a conversation. Very small percentage of buyers are actively buying. So most of the time, prospecting is injecting information to that individual, gaining information from that individual that's ultimately going to get you a sale in the future, not the present.
Okay, so it's not an immediate thing. I prospect, I get a deal.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, very rarely that's going to happen, right? So I think the stats, 97.3%. So 97%, or I should go the other way, but only 3% of your potential buying market is actively buying right now, right? Which means 97% is not. And that's of your entire buying market. That's not even who you could communicate with or who you could be talking to. That's the entire buying market that you have. So the vast majority need more interaction and more connection and more communication. And I think people go out and they prospect based on this idea of like, I'm going to find a lead, I'm going to find a lead, I'm going to find a lead, I'm going to find a lead. And in reality, they should be going out with the understanding that they're building a pipe. Like that's where the pipeline comes in, right? I'm building a communication pipeline where I now have people that I'm inserting information to and getting information from, that eventually down the road turns into a lead of some kind.
I like that. An information pipeline instead of a sales pipeline. That's really
Yeah.
good. So with that, like how do we start a conversation? What's a good start? Because you've got a prospect engagement solution. How do we start some of those conversations though, Brent?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in just going at it and asking them straight up, right? Are you interested in this, right? So even internally for us, it's, are you enhancing your business development efforts? straightforward. It's right to the point. They know immediately, like, this is what I do, and this is what I'm reaching out to them for. But more importantly, hopefully elicits a direct response. So like, no, not right now, but maybe down the road. Great. That gives me a lot of information down the road, right? No, we have this handled internally. Great. But now that may result in a question on my behalf of okay, what does that look like, or how's that working out for you, right? So a direct approach gets you somewhere a lot faster. And it might not be to the sale, but it might just be to the next question, right? And it guides me in that way. So I think a lot of the time it's just getting direct to the point. Everyone talks about short and sweet. And I do believe that short and sweet's the way to go. Just get direct to the point. Let's figure out if you're a 3%er. If you're not a 3%er, great. I know that what I need to do to get you to a 3%er.
So 97% of people are not ready to buy. That's an interesting stat. So with that, what do we do with those 97%, man? I mean, are we still prospecting them, or what are we doing?
Yeah, got to nurture them. Got to communicate with them. There's certainly going to be a majority that are the no's, of that 97 that are like, no, not interested, not willing to buy, not going to buy, and that's okay. I mean, if somebody gives you a no that says it's direct, that's as good as a yes to me. That I can remove them from my pipe and never really kind of think about them again. But the now but laters, or not now but laters rather, that I always talk about, or this isn't a fit for us now, but it could be in the future. Well, great. Like, let me communicate with them now throughout, drop information into them that might be helpful for them. Certainly, this day and age with LinkedIn and some other socials, it's important to go connect with them on social and make sure that they're just getting information that you're dropping out there on occasion. And then in the future, reaching back out and, again, being more direct of, we had a conversation 6 months ago, wasn't of interest at the time. How about now? And again, I can get to the point pretty quickly with a direct response like that. But these people have to be nurtured, and they have to be communicated with. And I think that's where most reps give up on. Most reps are, if it's a no now, they never talk to them again. They're like, oh, they're not buying from me, so they're not worth it. And it's like, they are worth it. There's tons of value there. Most of the time people are that's where their miss is. It's in your future business, because they're so worried about finding your now business.
So what does that actually look like? Like, give me an example of what you might use to nurture someone.
Yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of tools out there, right? I obviously, I'm not on here to talk about Maverick necessarily, but one of the things about Maverick that we built into it that made it so important is the ability to kind of schedule my follow-ups for the future. However, the problem with that is that not with Maverick, but the problem with just scheduling a follow-up, because there are components or platforms out there that can do it. It's not really the next follow-up that's important. It's the one after that, and the one after that, and the one after that, because there's a stat of the vast majority after the first interaction requires 5 touches just to get them to re-engage with you, right? And so most people will set a task in their CRM, and they'll go to that task when it comes up, send one email, they don't respond, and they say, okay, and they're out, right? And in reality, what you should do is create another task for your touch 2 and another task for your touch 4, right? That becomes time consuming and is really, really difficult. And so that's one of the things that we focus on with Maverick, is that you can just schedule all of those tasks in the future so that it does it for you. But in general, the tools are, your CRMs, okay, I got to set a task, or use your calendar, I got to do that, or use a tool, like I said, like Maverick. But again, people get caught up in that first interaction, right? So if somebody says, reach out to me in 6 months, well, the chances are that person's going to be busy in 6 months. So they're going to require a second touch and a third touch and a fourth touch to get them just to re-engage with you. And most people will reach out on that first one, maybe do a second task and a second touch, but then they give up on it because they're like, all right, well, like, this isn't worth my time anymore, even though it probably is worth your time.
So that's interesting. So what sorts of information would we send? Do we send case studies? Do we send articles? Do we send stats? I mean, what sorts of things should we send on the second through the fourth touch? Or do we just go direct, like you mentioned, and say, just, hey, is now a better time?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So if you're in a mode of I'm nurturing, right, where because there's 2 modes, right? There's a mode of I'm nurturing and definitively nurturing throughout that time, right? And if you're doing that, then it might be case studies, or it might be podcasts that you're doing. Hey, I thought you might find this podcast interesting, or like, or hey, I was working with another similar customer. It reminded me of you. This was a use case. Thought I'd present it to you so that in the future when we talk, you kind of have some context as to how we might be able to help you. Just little stuff like that, right? And then if it's and then of course on LinkedIn, you want to drop some stuff in there. If it's just okay, yeah, reach out to me in 6 months, that needs to be a little bit more direct. Hey Phil, we talked 6 months ago. If you recall, as a recap, here's what Maverick app does. Is now a good time to pick up the conversation. And again, that might get pushed off, or they might be like, yeah, this is now a good time to have the conversation.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. And so that whole piece there is prospecting. So you mentioned that big mistake where people let go way too soon. Do you think it's because they're right now, or do you think it's because they don't even realize how important it is to keep in touch?
Both. Both. So I think we're stuck in this world of we need results instantly, not recognizing that the work we're doing is creating results in the future, right? So a lot of times it's our sales managers or somebody just pressing. So a salesperson's job is to get things across the line. So they're so focused on the now business that if somebody's not being valuable to you, meaning they're not giving you money right now, then they've lost their value to you. And so they forget about them. And it's like, well, I'm going to focus on now my time to the people that are valuable, because we're always going to associate time to value. That's just what we do as humans, or especially in the workforce and sales, is we're always associating like how much time, like how much value am I going to get out of the time that I'm going to put in right now. And if somebody's a not now, but later, it becomes like a non-issue to them or a non-valuable issue to them, because like, okay, this person's no longer valuable to me. But if people really think about like a pipeline, and what it means to build a pipeline, well, now everybody becomes valuable, because or everybody who's a not now but later becomes valuable, because that's my future pipe. That's where I can get into a point where like my pipe can just roll, and I can start to just now be reaching out to people that I've been communicating with over the last 6 to 9 months. So I think it's both. One, we're just it's nature for us to say, okay, this isn't valuable to me and my time that I'm going to put into it right now. And the other part of it is that if they assume that somebody's pushing them off for 6 months, that they just don't want to do business with them. So again, they don't see the value there. And the reality is most people, if they're going to respond to you and tell you to reach out to them later, they're interested in some capacity. They're just not buying right now.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense. So let's get a little more tactical here. Let's talk a little bit about discovery calls. You guys wrote a good series on your blog about discovery calls. So
Yeah.
let's start with, what the heck is a discovery call? And do you tell your prospect that it's a discovery call?
Yeah, I think it's important, when you have discovery calls, to go into that and explain to the prospect, we're not here for you to buy anything necessarily, and we're not here for me to sell you something. We're just discovering, and that's a discovery on both sides. I'm going to discover if we have a solution for you, and you're going to discover if we're a good solution for you. And I think that sets the tone for an organic conversation. And I always talk about organic conversations, especially in discovery calls, but also just general sales calls, right? The more organic your conversation can become, the better it's going to be, and the more information that you're going to get on both sides. So discovery call is a really good time. And I'm not saying like every discovery call won't necessarily turn into a sale, because sometimes it can, but that's a really good time to just paint the picture of, we're just information gathering right now. And when I say we, I mean collectively we are. You're going to gain information from me and vice versa. And so yeah, and I think it's really important to set that tone with the prospect when you're on the call with them.
Okay, so we set that tone.
Yep.
And then you mentioned that the number one question that you need to ask is, so why did you take this call? What are we hoping to get from that?
Yeah, so you can get a lot from that right away. You can understand exactly why you're there. Are they a realistic buyer? Do they have an initiative going on right now? Are they just kicking the tires and they just want to get some information from you? What are they there for? Most of the time, people are going to tell you, and it also helps you drive the conversation. So if the response is, well, we're going through an initiative right now, this is high on our radar. We've evaluated a couple platforms. So like, I'm on the phone evaluating with it. Great. I can drive now my conversation into your evaluating process and make sure you understand my product and make sure you understand what we're talking about. If it's, we have an evaluation coming next year, we're trying to get a feel for what's out there, right? Now I can drive the conversation in more of asking a lot of questions so that I can better position myself for the future, right? And so that I can now have a better conversation with them more holistically about their business and what they're looking to achieve and what information they're trying to gain between now and then. And then that gives me a lot more power in the future. And then as I nurture them, I can now nurture them with that information. So that question to me is just always the best question, because it opens up the doors to everything right away, and there's nothing hidden.
Yeah. So you mentioned getting the power in the future with that. Tell me, how does that fuel our conversation? Tell me a little more about that.
Elaborate a bit.
So you mentioned that first, hey, so why did you take this call? It fuels more power in the future. So tell me a little bit more about how that fuels that power.
Yeah, well, again, if they're just there to evaluate and ask questions for a future initiative that they have, it powers me in a couple of ways. Again, it allows me to ask different questions that aren't necessarily now questions, right? And I might not dig into anything super specific in the product or the offering right now, but I might throw some pieces in here and there periodically throughout the conversation. But more importantly, what it does is allow me now, if this becomes a nurture conversation where I need to communicate with them and nurture with them over the next 4 or 5 or 6 months until they're ready for that initiative, now my nurture becomes a lot easier because I can put things in front of them that I got out of that conversation that I know will be relevant to them in what I have versus what they're trying to evaluate for, right? So my next email might be in 3 weeks and say, hey, Phil, I know that we talked, last time we talked, you mentioned you're not going to be doing anything for 6 months. But again, was talking to a customer, thought about you immediately. Here's the use case, thought you'd find this interesting. No pressure, don't even need to respond to me, but I just wanted to share this with you, right? Or an article like, hey, here's a really cool article, like based on our conversation, I felt like you'd find this interesting, even if it's not your article. And again, so this now helps establish a relationship with the end user or the customer or the prospect, because you listen to them, you heard them, now you're providing information to them. So when it becomes closing time, you're probably ahead of the game because you're doing more based off of your conversation than just, hey, I'm trying to follow up with you because you asked me to follow up with you.
Gotcha. Yeah, I misheard the word. You said empower, which I heard just power. So
Oh.
empowering discovery is so important, right?
Mhm.
Getting that information. So I really value that. That was a great elaboration for us there. That
Yeah.
with that, you mentioned that a tone of curiosity is the most important thing. So talk to me about that. What does that mean, Brent? How do we get curious on these discovery calls?
You ask a lot of questions, and listen, certainly. But I've always said it. I think the second that you start selling is the second that you lose deals. I think if people just sat there like we're sitting here and have an organic conversation and all right, talk about your business. What do you guys do? Oh, that's interesting. What do you find that are the biggest that how do you find that impacts your business the most, or how does that help your business the most, or just again, organic conversations where you're listening to them, but then just kind of asking a question, not necessarily a question to get to a sale, but a question to truly understand what they mean by, or to truly understand how that's impacting their business or what it's doing to their business. That gets you a lot further than just asking a pointed question that's going to get you to the next phase in your demo, right, or something like that. And so I've always been, and I believe it's the best way to go, but I'm a very conversational salesperson. I don't believe that somebody should get on the phone and have to sell anybody. They should be able to have a conversation with them and organically gather information and provide information. And the end result is, okay, based on what you told me, our product or our service is the right solution for you.
There you go. That makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah, curiosity is a killer attribute of great salespeople, especially if they're prospecting, because the more
Yeah.
curious they can get, the better they can be.
Yeah, and it is, and again, it's hard for people to get curious, right? Because they try to get to that sale so often that they're just almost going through bullet points of, all right, I need to make sure I get these questions across, instead of just becoming truly curious about what somebody has going on. And you end up asking better questions that way too, because you're genuinely curious about their business and what they're doing. If you have the right solution for them, it's always going to be the right solution, right? And you're always going to be able to pepper that into the conversation, and that's going to become organic as well, right? Yeah, totally hear you. A lot of our customers have exactly the same thing. That's exactly why we did this in our product. Great to hear, that we can help you in that way, or sorry to hear that you're having those issues. Again, it can just be a very organic conversation, and should be.
Okay, cool. Well, let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about the difference between an email blast and a campaign drip. You wrote an article about this on your blog, and I think this is really interesting because I get a lot of folks that ask me this question. Shouldn't I just put them on my email list and just hit them with a newsletter every week, every month, every 2 weeks? I mean, what do you think about that?
Yeah. So the answer is no. That you shouldn't. So I guess it depends on A, where they are in the cycle, and B, what you want to accomplish from them. Obviously, marketing has to happen. Marketing has to happen. Sales has to happen. I think they can happen as a cohesive unit. I don't think they should happen at the same time. I think they either need to happen before, marketing needs to happen before or after. I personally believe the marketing component should happen after. And the sales rep does their due diligence, tries to find that 3%. When you're doing a drip campaign, again, the idea is more to provide, kind of information that's going to identify for you if they're a 3% buyer, right? And if they're a 3% buyer, great, I want them now, right? And then if they're not, okay, I want to reach out to them beyond and build that relationship. When you're doing email blasts and you're putting out mailers and stuff, that's informative. Like, you're just providing information to them to talk about your product, or to be a thought leader in that space. So again, those two things can happen together, but you don't necessarily want them happening at the exact same time, right? And so my world is, if somebody comes through and I drip them through a campaign, and I've kind of gone through my due diligence, LinkedIn, haven't really hit anything or hit home with anything with them, I'll send them to marketing. And then marketing will now take over and start sending them mailers and start sending them some things that's a little bit more informational, like just organic about the company and thought leadership and how we feel about the space and how we rate. Because you never know. Sometimes people just don't want to get a direct email from somebody, but they'll get something like that and they'll want to read it. Vice versa, a lot of people just don't want to get a bunch of junk in their folder, and might be more receptive to just a more direct question, more direct approach. But they both have to be done.
Yeah, and the shorter, sweeter should come from a rep, not
100%.
necessarily from an email newsletter, right?
Yep, 100%. Yeah. I mean, again, the mailer, the mail blast, like, but the idea there is informative with PDFs. Maybe there's a PDF, maybe there's a visual, maybe there's something that's a little bit more enticing visually for them to pique their interest. The email from the rep needs to just be short, sweet, and to the point. And that's the absolute best way that you're going to be able to get results.
Well, and that gets back to the discovery. The sales rep discovered you're not going to put those 68 reasons in an email newsletter. You're going to pick something.
Yeah, exactly. And I wouldn't. There might be occasions where somebody says, hey man, this isn't for me right now. Let's reconnect in a year from now and kind of see what happens. I think it's totally fine to then ask them, like, great, awesome. Do you mind if I drop you in our newsletter, a weekly newsletter, and you can, kind of see what we have going on between now and then, and I'll reach out to you then. And so that can happen, right? And just explain it to them. It's just informative, just gives you some information on kind of our thought leadership and how we look at the industry and what we're doing. And if they say no, so be it. It is what it is. But yeah, I think in those discoveries, you should never then take those people and then add them to marketing. That seems silly and counterproductive.
Yeah. Well, and I like you said, you have to ask. That's so important, right? We have to get permission for that. And if we're somewhere that's not in the United States, we actually have to have them opt in and check a box in order to do that, right? They got to use either CAN-SPAM or GDPR, something like that, right? In order to do that. Is that correct?
Yeah, GDPR is pretty strict on the. You have to have pretty strict kind of requirements around their ability to say yes or them saying no. CAN-SPAM is a little different. I could go into it all day. I mean,
Or Castle's Canada. That's right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, CAN-SPAM is, I mean, at its core is that you need an opt-in, but based on how you write the message and actually what you're giving them gives you a little bit more freedom. But yeah, I just think it's important if you're going to be on the phone with somebody, especially, why not ask them? There's no reason to kind of just throw them in there.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's always polite. You risk a yes if you get that. So I agree. I think it's important to ask. So what did I not ask you about prospecting, Brent? What's like one of your secret weapons or secret things that you do that's really helpful besides obviously using MavericApp.io?
Yeah, I mean Maverick CBIT, but multi-channel. You got to use the tools, and you also have to use the LinkedIn, and you got to use the newsletters, and you got to do everything. I think people get so one-dimensional, and that they try one thing and it doesn't work, and they're like, okay, like this thing stinks, and it's like it doesn't. People take a lot of touches. You know, I mean, it's a lot of touches, 9 to 13 touches on average, just to get a response, and that's just to get a no. So it becomes hard for people to recognize that, but they need to understand that there has to be more done. My CRO, I don't have a lot of time to do it, so I don't do the ton of cold calling, but he'll go in and go to his top opens, and he'll do weekly call lists from his top opens, like people that are engaging with his emails, and he gets a ton of calls for them. I can't tell you the amount of people that have all of that data information in front of them that just don't use it. They're expecting a set it and forget it. They're expecting a magical tool, and there is absolutely no such thing as a magical tool that's going to work. Business development and prospecting is by far the hardest thing in sales in my mind, by far. There's nothing that comes even close to the amount of pain and suffering that goes into business development and prospecting. But you got to get through it, right? And start to recognize your process, and start to recognize the tools that work for you, and create a good process, and just run with that process.
Right on. Right on. Super helpful. Well, friends, if you're looking to get more information from Brent, I encourage you to go to MavericApp.io. That's Maverick, just like the Top Gun person, MavericApp.io. So, Brent, you guys, that's kind of one of the reasons why you named it Maverick App, right? It's the wingman.
Yeah, it became it became that. We really started Maverick as what an actual Maverick is, and somebody who beats at their own drum and kind of does their own thing, and goes against the grain. And so that Maverick started as that, and morphed into this, Maverick being a wingman, and being there for you, and then kind of branding took over. So it worked out really well.
Cool. Definitely worked out well. So, Brent, last question. If folks are going to want to talk to you, get more information from you, where would you send them? How would you have them get in touch with you?
Yeah, they can email me directly at brent@mavericapp.io. They can also email Steve Wallace at steve@mavericapp.io. And we'll get them set up with the appropriate person or ourselves to have a communication. They can obviously go to our website as well, which is mavericapp.io, and register there to have a conversation.
Wow. So you gave me your direct email address. Again,
Yeah,
that's
I don't mind.
Brent@mavericapp.io, BRENT@mavericapp.io. Good stuff there, my
Yeah.
friend. Thank you so much for sharing all your prospecting insight. And I think your point about empowering yourself with a discovery call is super valuable. So thank you for sharing that.